Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to this very special day, very holy day. Tonight's a holy night, especially a holy night, and even this afternoon, today is a holy day as well, because today corresponds to when the Korban Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, was brought as an offering by the entire Jewish people. Everyone brought a Paschal Lamb as an offering in the Beis Hamikdash on Erev Pesach. And as such, it's a Yom Tov. This is the beginning of the prohibition of chametz, for example, begins in really in an hour or two or so. You can't have chametz after an hour before midday on an Erev Pesach. It's a Yom Tov. It's considered the beginning of the whole build-up towards the culmination of this what we call the Leil Hiskadesh Chag. It's the night of the holiness of the Yom Tov, and I just from a personal perspective, from a personal experience many years ago, when I had the zechus, the great merit of being able to spend an entire Pesach, a whole Pesach from beginning to end, with my Rosh Hashiva, with my Rabbi Rav Aaron Shechter Shlita, and I spent a whole Yom Tov with him. When he invited me for Yom Tov a few weeks before Pesach, he said to me, "Where am I going to be for Pesach this year?" So I said, I'm not sure yet. Well, you'll come to me. You'll come with me, to me for Pesach. So I said, which meal, which Seder? And he responded to me, "You'll come to me for Pesach." And that meant basically that I was going to be with him for the entire 8 days of Pesach. I didn't have to sleep there because I was sleeping in the yeshiva, but it meant that I was going to go to his house for every single day of Pesach. Pesach is 8 days long outside of Israel. So that meant I was going to be there, going for every single meal, twice a day, to his house with other students as well. And it was an incredible merit, an incredible experience to be able to spend 8 days with one of the holiest people in the world. He was one of the great Rosh Hashivas, and to spend Pesach with him for 8 days was really an amazing experience. And but the reason I'm mentioning this right now is because it began this afternoon. It began on Erev Pesach, because he said, "Come for the first meal, the first Seudah, the first meal is going to be on Erev Pesach." Now, how many people have a special meal, a Seudas Yom Tov on Erev Pesach? It's never heard of, and you can't even have bread. We're not supposed to have bread right now. You can't have bread, obviously. By midday you can't have bread, and also you can't have even matzah, because you're supposed to go into Pesach with an appetite for matzah, and you don't eat matzah. Some people don't eat matzah for an entire month before Pesach. So there's no matzah. And if there's a meal, normally you have a meal with bread. And so I learned very quickly that the meal was to commemorate the Korban Pesach, commemorate the fact that we brought a Korban Pesach on Erev Pesach, and that was when the Yom Tov really began. So we came to his house. We didn't have bread. We had some meatballs and some potatoes, whatever it was, and everyone was ready for Yom Tov. Everyone was wearing their Yom Tov attire. The Rosh Hashiva was wearing his Yom Tov attire. We had our first Suda on Erev Yom Tov. It was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 2 o'clock in the afternoon before Pesach, and that was the beginning of the Chag. And that's why even today is a special day. And again, it commemorates the time when the Korban Pesach was brought, which, as I spoke about last week, the Korban Pesach symbolizes the Mesiras Nefesh, the self-sacrifice, and our devotion, our desire to want to serve Hashem and to give things up for the sake of service of Hashem, because that's what it's about, to give things up for the sake of a service of Hashem, going out of our comfort zone. And that's what the Korban Pesach, one of the aspects of the Korban Pesach. So this is a very big Yom Tov today as well. But of course, it really begins tonight. So among the different mitzvahs of tonight is the mitzvah of telling the story. We all know that. That's the Haggadah. Haggadah is the retelling of the story of the Exodus. The other mitzvahs of the night, of course, are the eating of the matzah, the eating of the maror, and reclining when you're eating, and also the 4 cups. They're the other customs and the mitzvahs of the evening. But one of the biblical commanded mitzvahs of the evening is telling the story. Is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the story of the Exodus from Egypt. So many of you are familiar. I'm sure everyone is familiar with this. I mean, I know that when you read the Haggadah and you see the Haggadah, you'll remember this. That the beginning of the Haggadah, before we get into the meat and the potatoes of the story, right after the Manishtana, a couple of paragraphs after the Manishtana, so it says, Amar Belazar ben Azariah, the Rebbe Elazar ben Azariah said, Harei ani keben shivim shana. Behold, I'm like a 70-year-old person. He wasn't really 70 years old, but he aged very quickly. He was really actually, I think, very, very young. I think, if I recall correctly, he was like 17 or 18 years old. He was a very young man, but he aged very quickly. He had a white beard. And I think the reason for that given is because he ascended to a position of authority and leadership in the people at a young age, and he was, so to speak, blessed with white hair in order to give that external appearance of being a person of esteem and prestige and age. So he said, I was like a person of 70 years old, but in my years, lo zechisi shete omer, Yitzit Mitzrayim B'leilos, but I never merited to find out and to understand, to learn the source for the obligation to recite, for the obligation to remember the Exodus from Egypt at night time. Now, this is in the Haggadah, and what he's saying is, I never merited to know the source for the mitzvah of telling the story, of remembering the Exodus at night time. Now, let me make it very clear, because people get confused with this. We're not discussing here the night of Pesach. So this paragraph has nothing to do with the night of Pesach. This is entirely to do with all the other days of the year. And he's saying that I never merited to know the source for the obligation to remember the Exodus at night time every single day of the year. Until Ben Zoma, another sage, explained it to him and showed him the source for it in a verse. So what is this obligation of remembering the Exodus every day of the year, every night of the year? Well, the source for this is in the Shema, the daily Shema, which we recite in the morning and in the evening. And the last paragraph of the Shema, which contains the mitzvah tzitzis, also contains one very important line. And that line is that I took you out of the land of Egypt. And in many Sidurim, in the Art Scroll in particular, in the Art Scroll Seder, it actually has a note in that next to that line. It says, when it says, I took you out, I am Hashem that took you out of the land of Egypt. So the Art Scroll, they put in over here, at this moment over here, pay attention to this line well, and have intention to fulfill the positive commandment of remembering the Exodus from Egypt. And this is certainly done in the morning every single day of the year. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in the Haggadah is saying that it's even said at nighttime every day of the year as well. And he was just confused. He never knew the source for it until Ben Zomer expounded another verse to prove to him that even nighttime every single day of the year, there's an obligation to remember the Exodus from Egypt. But again, this paragraph is nothing to do with Pesach. It's just to do with every day of the year, that there's an obligation to remember the Exodus every single day of the year. In the morning and even at nighttime as well. Twice a day to remember the Exodus. So tonight, when you go to the Seder and you're reading this paragraph, you'll have a bit of a better understanding of this. First of all, again, the first point is, this paragraph has nothing to do with Pesach. It's to do with the daily obligation to remember the Exodus from Egypt. And of course, it begs the question, what's different about that, the mitzvah of remembering the Exodus every single day of the year, and remembering the Exodus that we're going to be doing tonight as well, and tomorrow night? That's question number one. Question number one is, what's the difference between the two mitzvahs? We have a mitzvah, special mitzvah tonight of the Haggadah, of telling the story and remembering the story, and yet there's a mitzvah every single day of the year, twice a day. I mean, we're doing it every single day, twice a day for the whole year round. So what's really different about tonight's mitzvah in comparison to the daily mitzvah? That's question number one. Another question is a very interesting question. Another question is this, is that, of course, we know there are 613 mitzvahs altogether, 613. Now, when I say 613, David, you can hear me right now. David, I'll explain this right now very clearly. The 613 mitzvahs are considered root mitzvahs. You have to look at 613 as being root mitzvahs. Root mitzvahs meaning that these are the fundamental rules of all of the instructions in the Torah. So there are thousands of instructions in the Torah. There are thousands of rules which are in the Bible, in the Torah. But which ones are the fundamental ones? Which ones are the root ones? There are 613 altogether. That's a tradition we've had. That's never been debated for thousands of years. 613 root commandments from which all the other commandments and instructions emerge from. So one of them is tonight's mitzvah. And it's, I think, in one of the medieval commentators who lists the mitzvahs, I think it's mitzvah number 24, I think. And that's tonight's mitzvah, telling the story. So I just explained, and based upon what the Haggadah says, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says that there's also a daily mitzvah to remember the Exodus. So which mitzvah number is that? Which one is that? So, interestingly, there's no mitzvah. It's not counted in the 613. The daily obligation, remember the Exodus, is not counted in the 613. Tonight's mitzvah is, but the daily obligation is not. And the question is, what's that about? Like, why is the daily obligation, even though it's biblical, again, it's biblical because it's a biblical law, so to speak. It's not so to speak. It's in the Torah to remember the Exodus every single day, but it's not. It doesn't rise to the level of being, so to speak, a root mitzvah of the 613. Tonight's mitzvah does rise to the level of being one of the 613, but not the daily obligation. And that's the question: is what's going on? So we have two questions. Again, number one, and really they're interconnected to each other. That's why I'm presenting them this way. What is the difference between the daily obligation to remember the Exodus and tonight's obligation to remember the Exodus? And why is the former not listed as one of the 613 and tonight's mitzvah is listed as the 613, one of the 613? So the answer, there are many answers to this question. The answer which I was looking at this week was given by my Rosh Hashiva's Rebbe, Rav Hutner, Zecher Tzadik Levracha. He was the author of the very famous work called the Pachad Yitzchak, and he explains as follows. And he says that in order, what qualifies a mitzvah to be one of the 613? Like when I just said before about certain mitzvahs being root mitzvahs, and they're the 613. What determines whether a mitzvah becomes a root mitzvah or not? Like so the Rishonim, the commentators, they explain. It's a very extensive discussion about explaining what makes a mitzvah, what makes something a root mitzvah. But one of the principles is this. One of the principles which qualifies a commandment to become one of the 613 is whether or not that mitzvah is going to be applicable when Mashiach comes. A mitzvah which will not apply when Mashiach comes does not, even though it could be biblical today, but it doesn't rise to that higher level of being a root mitzvah if it doesn't apply when Mashiach comes. So a mitzvah which doesn't apply when Mashiach comes, so that does not be, it could be biblical, we are obligated to do it, but it's not going to be applicable when Mashiach comes. So the mitzvah, the daily mitzvah of remembering the Exodus, which we have to do in the morning, at night, in the Shema, like I explained, that mitzvah of remembering the Exodus will not be relevant when Mashiach comes. And because it won't be relevant when Mashiach comes, therefore it doesn't go into the list of the 613. But the question is, why not? And also, and before that, the other mitzvah, tonight's mitzvah, because it is in the 613, perforce means that it's going to be relevant when Mashiach comes. So tonight's mitzvah, telling the story, is going to last till the end of days. Tonight's mitzvah, but the daily mitzvah, remembering the Exodus, is not going to be relevant when Mashiach comes. The mitzvah, remembering the Exodus. And the question is, why would there be a difference? So the Gemara gives an answer. The Gemara explains the difference is like this: is that the Gemara gives a mashal, like a parable of someone traveling along a road. And he's traveling along, and then he comes across a bear, and the bear tries to attack him, and he escapes the bear. And then he's walking further down the road, and then he comes across a wolf. I think it's the other way around, actually. Well, I'm not sure which animal is more dangerous. But as he's walking along the road, he keeps encountering more and more dangerous animals. And as he encounters each dangerous animal, more dangerous animal, and he escapes from it, so then what happens is, psychologically, he'll forget about the earlier salvation and escape from the other animals. I mean, the worse the troubles get, the more difficult the situation is, and he escapes from the more difficult situations, he forgets the earlier ones. Those become outshined by the more recent tribulations and the escape from these recent tribulations. That's the nature of, that's the way memory works. We only relate to what we're experiencing right now. So if something dangerous happened to us yesterday or a few months ago, and then it got outshined by a more dangerous event today, we're going to have more recollection of today's event than yesterday's event. Obviously, cognitively, you'll remember it, but it doesn't have an impact in the same way as the salvation and the escaping from the tribulations of today, which are much worse. So one of the principles we have is that the tribulations and the salvation from those tribulations are going to be much greater and worse, but yet great at the end of days. When Mashiach comes, the transformation is going to be so cataclysmic and so phenomenal that it's going to outshine the exodus from Egypt. The miracles of the end of days and the troubles of the end of days, I'm not going to get into what those troubles are, how they're going to manifest themselves, but the tribulations and the tsaras of the end of days and the salvation from the tsaras are going to outshine the tribulations and the salvation from the tsaras of Mitzrayim, such that remembering the Exodus becomes like irrelevant. At the end of days, remembering the Exodus is going to become so irrelevant in the face of the greater experience of what's happening in the salvation from at the end of days. So hence, the mitzvah remembering the Yetzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt, at the end of days is no longer going to be relevant because it's going to be outshined by the later miracles. And that's why the mitzvah of that mitzvah is not, although right now we have this daily obligation to remember the Exodus, but since it's not going to be relevant at the end of days, therefore it doesn't get to the level of a 613, one of the 613. That's with regard to remembering the Exodus. But tonight's mitzvah is not about remembering the Exodus. You see, tonight's mitzvah is a whole different mitzvah. It's a whole different mitzvah which will not be affected by the miracles of the end of days. What is unique about tonight's mitzvah? Aside from the fact that you're elaborating upon it, because elaborating upon remembering is really just an elaboration of remembering. It's not really fundamentally different. What's fundamentally different about tonight's mitzvah, which makes it unique and therefore applicable to the end of days, is what the Gemara says on page 116b in the Talmud. One second, you find this over here. I want to read it to you. So the Mishnah in the Talmud goes through discussing the Seder. So the Mishnah says, mitzvah, and actually we say this in the Haggadah as well, but the Mishnah, this comes from the Mishnah. It says, B'chol dor v'dor, in every generation, Chayov Adam Liros es Atzmo, a person is obligated to see himself Ke'ilu hu yotzim Mitzrayim, as though he left Mitzrayim. Part and parcel and fundamental to the mitzvah of telling the story tonight is not recalling, because if it's recalling, then again that's not the mitzvah. Recalling the Exodus is the daily mitzvah. We're not just recalling tonight. Tonight's mitzvah, of course, is telling it, but essential to the telling of it is the seeing oneself as though he personally left Mitzrayim. As the verse says, the Gemara quotes the verse, Rava said you have to say the verse. When you're saying the Haggadah, you should say this following verse to really make this hit home strongly. The verse says, Osanu hotzi misham. Us, he took us out. He took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim. We're here we're 2,000 years away from the event. We're thousands of miles away from Mitzrayim. What does it mean? He took us out of Mitzrayim. Osanu hotzi misham. He took us out of Mitzrayim. And that's part of the mitzvah of telling the story. It's telling the story in a personal way, it's telling the story to yourself. Of course, we're telling the story to the children, we're telling the story to other people as well. But it's essential to see oneself as though I personally left Mitzrayim. And that's a chiyuv, that's part of the obligation of telling the story tonight. We don't do that the rest of the year. We don't have to reenact the experience. We don't have to go through a process of, which I'll explain more in a few minutes. We don't have to go through a process of viewing myself as though I left Mitzrayim during the rest of the year. The nature of remembering the Exodus during the year is appreciation and praising Hashem. Praising Hashem because the most recent phenomenal miracle that we all experienced as a nation, although it's thousands of years ago, was the Yetzias Mitzrayim. That's the most recent miracle. We have to always be thankful for that, thankful for our Jewishness, thankful for being able to have the mitzvahs and to be able to have the Torah, which all came from the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So therefore we have to thank Hashem for that original Mitzrayim and remember that event, and that's extend for thousands of years, and then it'll get overshadowed by the future redemption, because the nature of the mitzvah during the year is just to remember. But on Pesach night, I'm not just remembering it. It's certainly necessary to be thankful tonight as well, but we've got to get to that next level of seeing myself as though I left Mitzrayim. Seeing myself as though I left Mitzrayim. Now let's think about this for a second. If I'm seeing myself every single year that I left Mitzrayim, think about what happens. If I view myself as though I'm leaving Mitzrayim today, that never gets old. That by definition can never get old. That's always present. So it doesn't make a difference if a future miracle at the end of days is going to be so greater. If every year, if my obligation is to view myself right now as though I'm leaving Mitzrayim, that is always alive. It never goes stale. It's never old. And therefore, it's always going to be relevant at the end of days as well, because that's the nature of the obligation. The obligation not to remember an event of the past. That's going to get outshined by the end of days miracle. The obligation is to see myself in the present moment as though I'm leaving Mitzrayim right now. That's the obligation tonight. Every single year, I've got to look at myself. I'm going out of Mitzrayim. I'm going out of Mitzrayim. Every year, year in, year out. And therefore, even when Mashiach comes and other miracles come along and outshine the early miracles, doesn't change the fact that I'm going out of Mitzrayim right now, because that process of going out of Mitzrayim never ends. It never ends. It never ends. And therefore, that mitzvah always applies at the end of days as well, because it has no relevance to it's not a recollection of historical events which can get overshadowed by future or other miraculous events which are greater. It's not the mitzvah. The mitzvah is to relive the experience of leaving Mitzrayim. That's the mitzvah tonight, to relive it. So of course I'm telling the story, elaborating on it, but in the midst of elaborating on the story, to relive it. And the question is, how do you relive it? How do you relive it? What am I talking about? I'm going to relive it. I'm thousands of years away from Mitzrayim. I'm thousands of miles away from Mitzrayim. So what it means to relive it? That sounds like very nice. What does it mean to relive it? The answer is, going back to what I spoke about last week, this is a new beginning. It's a new beginning. Tonight's a brand new beginning again. We're at Rosh Hashanah again. I know last week I spoke about how Rosh Chodesh Nisan kind of parallels and maps to Rosh Hashanah, but the whole period right now. And tonight is a new beginning. That's the culmination of that, right? Shabbos Gadol we spoke about last week was the parallel to Yom Kippur, a little bit mapped to Yom Kippur. But this whole period, this is for this time of the year, this is the Spitz. Tonight's the Spitz. Tonight's the ultimate. Tonight's the ultimate redemption. It's the ultimate redemption. And, I think I mentioned this last week. I don't know if I said it. Forgive me if I'm repeating myself again. But there's a lot of remozim, a lot of allusions at the Seder to this sense of a new beginning, like it's a brand new year, it's a Rosh Hashanah, it's a Yom Kippur, it's all of these things all wrapped up into one. One of the allusions, one of the great examples of this is, and you can share this with other members of the Seder tonight, you can say, where's the shofar? Anyone seen the shofar anywhere? Anyone seen the shofar? I don't know if I, can anyone give me like a nod if I said this last week? Did I say this last? I did. Maybe in a different class. I think in a different class. I'll say it again for those who didn't hear it. And it's review for those who did hear it. So the shofar, so you say, where's the shofar? Anyone see the shofar anywhere? And so they're looking at you like you're off the wall. And the answer is because there is a shofar. Because the word for plate, the Seder plate in Hebrew, is ka'ara, kuf ayin reish hey. Kuf ayin reish hey is the Seder plate, ka'ara. And if you take those letters, kuf ayin reish hey, and you look at the letters which come right below those letters in the Aleph base. So after a kuf comes what? The letter resh. The ayin, right? The letter underneath the ayin. After an ayin comes a pei, and after a resh comes a shin, and after a hey comes a vav. So I'm sure everyone was paying attention to those letters which I just said. And those letters, those additional letters, if you unscramble them, they spell the word shofar. So underneath the word ka'ara, the plate, there's a shofar hidden underneath the Seder plate. So that's your clue to the fact that the Seder night is a new beginning. This the sound of the shofar is blasting on Pesach night as well. But it's a new beginning. This is a new beginning, and we can't miss that point. So when we talk about I'm leaving Mitzrayim tonight, obviously we're not talking about physically leaving Mitzrayim. But we're talking about, and this is what the rabbis, the Bali Musa, they explain, the leaving of Mitzrayim is putting things behind us. Leaving our Mitzrayim. Leaving our personal Mitzrayim. That's the underlying message of the Pesach Seder. I'm leaving my Mitzrayim. So even though as I'm telling the story, and I'm going through the story, and remembering what happened, and doing the the daily obligation of remembering what happened and praising Hashem for all of that as well, which we're obligated to sing Hallel about that. But there has to be like this thought, not necessarily sharing with everybody else. You don't want to start telling everybody about your personal Mitzrayim, but to have in your own mind, what is my Mitzrayim? What is my personal Mitzrayim? The word Mitzrayim, said many times before, Mitzrayim means Meitzarim, constrictions. What are my constrictions? What are my blockages? What are the things which hold me back? On the Leil Seder, the night of the Seder, I'm leaving that behind. I'm leaving it behind. Now, it's a tall order, all of these things, but if a person takes one thing, one type of Mitzrayim in our lives, and as we're going through the Seder, to think about ways in which I can psychologically leave Mitzrayim, b'chol dor v'dor, person in every chayav liros es atzah, person's obligated to see himself as though he's leaving Mitzrayim. I'm going to leave Mitzrayim. We're all leaving Mitzrayim together, putting things behind us to march towards Mount Sinai to receive the Torah, to come closer to Hashem. We're putting things behind us, one thing at a time. That's the idea. That's the purpose of the Seder, and that's what distinguishes this mitzvah. It distinguishes this mitzvah from the daily obligation. The daily obligation is to remember and to appreciate. And this night's mitzvah is to relive it, to actually relive it once a year, to start all over again. It's a new beginning. It's a brand new beginning, and it's something which a person, has to really take advantage of because it only comes once a year. At least in Israel, it comes once a year. Here we have a second chance because we're so far away anyway. We need a second chance. Like Hashem has a rachmanas on us. We're far away from the kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, so He gives us a second chance, a second night of Pesach. But I was thinking to myself how to do this on a practical level because this morning I didn't finish doing this. This is like maybe a work in progress because I was thinking to myself, let me go through the steps of the Seder and think about a way to use every step at the Seder to stimulate a thought about something. So let's say, for example, I'm not going to give an example. Let's all personally think about one thing in our lives which we would like to walk away from, right? One thing which we'd like to work, a trait, a habit, a negative thought, whatever it may be, a behavior, something with mitzvahs, whatever the thing is, pick something. And, you got it in your head. So you're going to go into the Seder tonight with that thought in your mind. I'm going to work on this one particular thing. Now, mind you, I want to be clear about this. I want to just emphasize before I go further. The Seder primarily, when you have children and grandchildren, you can't lose sight that it would be a big mistake to get lost in our philosophical, esoteric thinking and personal, thinking at the cost of not paying attention to the children, because the Seder is about the children. And in fact, the Sefer which I was reading from Pachad Yitzchak, my Rebbe's Rebbe, right? I was listening to a shir this week, and this rabbi, his name is Rabbi Eitan Feiner, very famous rabbi. So he was telling, he's also a big fan of Pachad Yitzchak. It's a very tremendous, deep philosophical work, and I quote him a lot. So Rav Hutner, the author. So this Rabbi Eitan Feiner was talking about how his father told him that that he had the merit of going to the Seder with Rav Hutner when he was younger. And then Rabbi Feiner was all excited. He said, "Whoa, you went to the Seder with Rav Hutner, one of my favorite works on philosophy." And he said, "What was it like? What is it like at the Seder with Rav Hutner?" So he said back to him, he said he played with the kids. He played with the children, right? I don't know if he played. I mean, obviously he brought them into the, but he brought it down to their level. He brought the Seder down to the level of the children and the grandchildren were there. He didn't get into philosophy of the Seder, because we can't get away from the fact. We have to remember very, very clearly the Seder is about transmitting the tradition, transmitting Torah to the next generation. That's the first and foremost kavanah at the Seder. This is the link in the chain of passing on the tradition to children, grandchildren, or anyone who's there for that matter. It doesn't have to be children or grandchildren. If you know more than somebody else, and you have other people there who know less than you, you're now the leader of the Seder. You are passing on the tradition to somebody else. Can't forget that. But that's putting that on the shelf. Coming back to this point over here. At the same time, though, keep in mind one thing, one personal Mitzrayim. What is my personal Mitzrayim that I have? And then you work it through. Let's go through the 15 steps of the Seder. And for some of them, I'll be successful. Others, I'll invite you to have suggestions yourselves as well. Kadesh is the first thing. And forgive me for my terrible singing of this. Kadesh Uruchatz. My kids always laugh at me when I do this. I always get it wrong. So tonight, actually, I'm fortunate because I have my son-in-law who's got a good voice, and he's going to help me with this. Anyway, but Kadesh is the first step of the Seder. So what do we start off with? We're starting off our departure with what? Kedusha. The first thing, as we begin our journey tonight, we're starting off with realizing two things. I'm holy, and I'm traveling towards holiness. That's the starting point, Kedusha. We're starting off not negative, starting off positive. We're all holy people. Everyone is holy over here. No matter where we are on the spectrum. I don't mean where we are on the spectrum we are all holy, and we're all traveling towards holiness. We came from holiness. We're holy. That's the first thing. Next step is Uruchatz, wash our hands. So you think about the thing. I think of washing up. What's the washing of the hands? The washing of the hands in Judaism is about washing off spiritual impurity from the hands. So as you wash your hands, like you just do this quietly. You don't have to make a big fanfare of this. When you go to the sink, you wash your hands. I'm washing off the thing which I don't want anymore. I'm washing it off. Then we eat the karpas, right? The karpas is the dipping of the vegetable in salt water. Tears. I really should shed a tear about this thing which I've been attached to all my life and don't seem to walk away from. Next thing, yachatz. I'm going to break the middle matzah. I've got to start thinking about just breaking this habit. I'm going to break it. Magid, telling the story. What's that? Telling the story. You can't. Change doesn't just mean thinking in your mind, like thinking, like contemplating. Change means going through the motion. It's like they say, the devil's in the details. The devil's in the details is when you start getting into like kind of the actual enactment of the actual change. That's where change really begins. Because if you just theoretically think about, well, I want to change this, I want to change that, you have to go through the details of the process of what it means exactly. What does it mean if you want to change this particular habit, which seems to crop up when you go to so-and-so's house? So I've got to go through the steps and think, think in the details of the steps, what's going to be necessary to change that particular habit. So telling the story is really a reminder of how we have to reenact or project all of the situations which we have to apply this change to, getting into the details. Then after that, we wash our hands again because we're always washing the hands of the impurity. And motzi is, we make hamotzi on the matzah. Hamotzi, we're thanking Hashem for all that He gives to us. So even this change and the growth which we're going to go through on the Seder night, it's all min hashamayim. Success comes from Hashem. Whatever efforts we put into things ourselves, we can't forget that we need Hashem's help, and He's behind the scenes, and He's pulling the strings, and He's helping us along the way. And I'll tell you more about that in a few minutes. Then we get to the matzah. The matzah itself, freedom, this is it. This piece of matzah is my freedom. This symbolizes where I'm trying to get to. I'm trying to be free of that particular habit. I'm gonna look at this matzah right now. This matzah symbolizes my freedom. My freedom. This is my freedom, what I'm trying to break away from. And then back to the morrow, the bitterness. And then I stopped at that point. I didn't get any further. So I'm going to leave it to you to kind of figure out the rest, right? How to apply it to every step. So I apologize for that, because this thought only came to me like about half an hour ago. But whether you link it to every step in the Seder, you don't. But the most important thing is to know that in every generation, a person's obligated to look at himself as though he personally left Mitzrayim. And that means walking away from something in our lives. That's what Pesach. If we're just going to look at Yom Tovim as just like family get-togethers, and just ways to kind of just feel a bit Jewish, we're not getting it. We're not getting the true message. The true message of Yiddishkeit is putting things into practice, transforming ourselves, growing, transforming ourselves to become bigger people, holier people, closer to Hashem people. Every Yom Tov, every mitzvah is designed to do this, and Pesach is no less of a Yom Tov to do that with. So that's our part. That is the part that we play tonight. We're going to do that ourselves. But you know what? Hashem is there for us. Hashem is there for us, because what other night is like Pesach, which is so miraculous? Now, it's very interesting, because I learned something this morning, a few days ago, that never heard before, that there's fascinating there's midrashim and sources which talk about so all these other miracles which happened on the night of Pesach, right? For example, Purim. We had Purim a month ago, actually. Yeah, a month ago, right? So we learned about this. Why did we learned that Mordechai and Esther enacted a fast for the Jewish people to save, that Hashem should save them, and they enacted the fast to take place on Pesach. I spoke about that at the time, that they abolished Pesach that year in order to have to fast, in order to pray to Hashem for salvation from the wicked Haman. And we spoke about why they chose Pesach of all times. But another explanation is because Pesach is the night of miracles. The night of Seder is the night of miracles. It's like if a person wants to find water. If you want to find water somewhere, you don't go and dig in a dry spot. Where'd you dig? You dig in a place that once had water. Well, what's the night? What's the day that once had like an avalanche of water? The night which has the avalanche of water is the night of Pesach. So the potential in the night of Pesach is a potential which far surpasses every other day of the year. The potential for miracle, the potential for God to intercede and intervene into our lives to create a miracle. There's no other night like this. This is where there's water. So that's why Mordechai and Esther, they chose specifically, they went ahead with the fasting on the night of Pesach, because this is the opportune time for a miracle. Even it says, another medrash says that in the story of Purim too, when Achashverosh, one of the turning points in the whole story of Purim was when Achashverosh couldn't fall asleep at night, and he had the chronicles being read to him, and that's when he heard about Mordechai not being rewarded for saving his life, and then the whole chain of events there then occurred thereafter. That night, the medrash says, was the night of Pesach. Leil Seder was the night when Achashverosh couldn't fall asleep. And then everything started turning around. It's a night of miracles. Night of miracles. So, if we want to really, so we have to realize the potential in the night of Pesach is magnificent. Because this is the opportunity, this is the night that Hashem made the most amazing miracle. Took the Jewish people out of Mitzrayim, and that energy, the energy of miracle, the energy of nes, the energy of salvation, always exists on the night of Pesach. And it's like, even if we can't see it, and we're far away from it, but we know it, this is when it happened. And if we want to try to walk away, we want to try and walk out of our Mitzrayim in any way whatsoever. When we make our effort, know that you're doing it at a time when Hashem is helping us along the way. And it's a night of miracles. It's a night when we can really pray to Hashem for a transformation, for the ability to be able to move away. And He's there for us. He made miracles then. He'll make miracles. He made miracles on this night many, many more times as well throughout history. And God willing, He'll make miracles for us tonight as well. And the more we believe in this, the more successful we'll be. So therefore, we should all, really, it's, I can't emphasize enough. What should I say? And I'm not emphasizing. You don't need me to emphasize this. This is what the holiest night of the year. It's definitely the holiest night of the year, because, we don't call Kol Nidrei or Ne'ilah the holiest night of the year. It's called Leil Hiskadesh Chag, the night of the holiness of the holiday. It's a very holy night. It's an opportunity which is it's not to miss it. And even if you're in a place where you don't have access, God forbid, the terrible tragedies, like Rahman al-Islam, there are people who are in jail, people in circumstances where they weren't able to, in Holocaust and concentration camps, they couldn't have access to the mitzvahs. It doesn't mean to say the Kedusha is not there. It's still the holy Yom Tov. And even if a person doesn't have access to a mitzvah, any of the mitzvahs of the night, the Kedusha of the night is there. And a person should do whatever they can to be able to tap into that energy. And especially with their own efforts, together with the fact that this evening, it's a Leil Shemurim, it's a night of protection, we describe it as being, it's a night of protection from evil forces. So, there's a potential of magnificent proportions that if we only just believe in it, we tap into it, we put our effort into our own personal transformation of moving away from our Mitzrayim, we shall merit to be able to come closer to Hashem in this journey of our lives, and to make our lives more meaningful and more holy and more in accordance with God's will, and all contribute towards, again, bringing Mashiach. May this whole golus, this whole darkness, this whole craziness and mishigasin and craziness in the world should come to an end once and for all, with the final redemption, and even with that final redemption will be so much greater than this, than that one, we will still not stop growing. We'll still be doing this mitzvah of always emerging and metamorphosizing and growing and developing new parts of ourselves. And that should always go on forever. And we should bring the Mashiach very quickly.